Welcome everybody from my side as well. My name is Péter Staviczky. I'm a state aid expert working for the Hungarian government. In this presentation, I will express my personal views about how state aid rules are able or will be able to help to address the crisis caused by the COVID virus. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, as you are not experts on state aid law, I briefly summarize what is state aid rules, and then I will explain how these rules have been amended recently. So first of all, state aid rules are part of the EU competition law. They are meant to maintain the effective competition on the market, as financial intervention from public funds can distort competition among economic actors. And these rules prevent subsidy race between member states. Next slide, please. The main rules are defined in Article 107 and 108 of the Treaty of the EU. Here you can see the definition of state aid, which was mainly interpreted by the EU courts over the decades. So it's a very complex notion, but if we want to summarize, next slide please, we can see that there are certain elements what makes a state intervention state aid. First of all, it has to be addressed to undertakings, to economic actors, like in the tourist sector, a hotel or a flight company, an air company. Secondly, it has to use state resources, public resources. Third, it has to be selective. It has to be addressed to certain undertakings, but not all in the economy. It has to provide financial advantage, and it can have a distorting impact on competition and on the trade between member states. If all these are present, then we are talking about state aid. So these are cumulative conditions. Next slide, please. So there is a general prohibition in Article 107 of the treaty to grant state aid, as it is distorting the competition. But there are certain exemptions also expressed in this treaty, and it can be granted with certain strict limitations. And there is an independent control from the European Commission side. This is the competition authority above the member states, and the Commission is also defining what are the compatible state aid rules, what are the rules, what are the conditions, what needs to be meant to make a state aid compatible with the internal market. And generally, member state has to notify their plans before they start spending money, because with this way you can prevent unnecessary distortions in the market. It has to be mentioned that it applies to all forms of aid. So it doesn't matter whether this is a direct grant or a tax deferral or a capital or a soft loan or a guarantee. State aid rules apply to all forms of aid. Next slide, please. So what does the Commission analyze when they check a state measure? It analyzes the positive and the negative impacts of the aid. There is a special notion for this. It is called common assessment principles. They check how much the aid contributes to the common interest, which is not only the benefit for the beneficiary, but also for the wider society or the economy. How much it remedy market failures, how much the state intervenes where there is a need for it, how much it is changing the behavior of the undertaking to do something what they wouldn't have done without the aid. So it has to have an incentive effect. It has to be proportionate and appropriate, so it has to be limited to the minimum necessary, and how much it has negative impacts, and what can be done or what has been done to mitigate the negative impacts of the public intervention. And last but not least, it has to be transparent to the public, so the public has to know more or less how much money the member states are pouring into the economy. Next slide, please. So this is generally how state aid rules are applied. There is a strict ban on granting, and there are exemptions. So here you can see on this slide what are these exemptions. These are mostly what can be called as a common interest: regional development, research and development, environmental protection, climate change, employment, broadband deployment, public services, transport and agriculture. And there are special exemptions what can be used in case of this virus crisis, and this can be seen on the next slide. Here we have two main directions, two main possibilities defined in the treaty functioning the treaty on the functioning of the European Union. First of all, we have the possibility for member states to make good the damage caused by exceptional occurrences like this outbreak of the virus. This is some kind of backward looking, because the companies have to show that they have suffered some losses, like airlines because flights have been cancelled or events have been cancelled or something like that. And secondly, the Commission can grant state aid to prevent or remedy any kind of serious disturbance in the economy of the member states. So this is more a forward-looking thing, because it focuses on also on the effects in the future. So this second option was used during the economic and financial crisis by the Commission. They have created temporary rules to mitigate the impacts of the financial and economic crisis. Next slide, please. So what has been done so far in relation to this virus situation? First of all, the Commission started its communications involving state aid in early March, mid-March. They said that state aid rules will apply. Member states have a wide array of possibilities and tools in their hands, and they can use the existing rules. But after a certain point, when the things were going very wrong in Italy, they have understood that they need to apply new rules. So they need to create new rules, and the Commission on the 19th of March adopted a temporary framework which set out new rules, and it declared that there can be serious disturbance in the economy of all member states. It's important to highlight that this is not to save the financial sector, but more the real economy. And it can focus on certain sectors like the tourism, which are affected the most by the impacts of the crisis, but not necessarily. So member states can use it in every sector, the rules, the temporary rules, which are in this new framework. Next slide, please. So what is the situation from lawmaking point of view? It is unprecedented in a sense that the Commission has adopted this framework very quickly, and then it has amended once early in April, and then there is a second amendment underway. So this is a very quick lawmaking on the one hand. Secondly, it reacted also on the member states' public statements that they will use a lot of public money to help economy to get back to normal, to maintain economic activities, and so on. So that's a special situation for everybody. And also, it was said by the Commission that they adopt after the notifications the approval in a very short time frame, in 2, 3, 4 working days, which usually these kind of notifications lasts 6 months to 2 years. So it's quite a difference. We have to highlight that this is the EU framework on state aid. So member states are able to be more rigid. They shouldn't go to the maximum what is allowed. They can ask additional conditions, and besides, they can also notify other measures which are not defined in these rules. But in those cases, the approval will last most probably longer. Next slide, please. So what is allowed under the temporary framework? What are the new 8 categories which were created by the Commission to overcome the impacts of the crisis? First of all, there is a possibility to grant 800,000 euro of aid to all undertakings. There is a possibility to grant preferential guarantee on loans. There is a possibility to grant loans with subsidized interest rates. And there is a possibility to do the guarantees and the loans via financial intermediaries, and the Commission also eased the conditions of state-backed export credit insurance, short-term export credit insurance. Next slide, please. So what are the rules of this 800,000 euro aid category? This can only be granted via schemes, so via 8 programs, not specifically just for one firm, but for a number of firms. It can only be granted to firms which were going into difficulties because of the crisis, but apart from that, they were healthy last year. It can be granted in different forms: grants, tax advantages, repayable advances, and so on. And it shouldn't be, or it has to be separated from de minimis aid, so it can be granted beside de minimis aid, and there are specific thresholds in the agriculture and fisheries sector. Next slide, please. What about guarantees? The same applies. It has to be granted via scheme and not for unhealthy firms. It can be granted for loans up to 6 years with a very low guarantee fee from 0.25 to 2% guarantee fee per year, which varies depending on the maturity of the loan and the size of the undertaking. And the highest amount of the loan is limited, either related to the last year's gross wage cost of the undertaking or its turnover, or on the individual liquidity needs, which are separately shown. It's very important to show that these guarantees can cover up to 90% of the loan. Usually the highest percentage what is allowed under stated rules is 80%. And the same rules applies, next slide please, or very similar rules applies to loans. It can be granted as a scheme up to 6 years loans with the same pricing, with the same highest amount, limited to gross wage or turnover or the liquidity needs of the company. And it's important that for the same loan, you cannot use subsidized loan and subsidized guarantee. So either this or either that. But these are very flexible means to pure liquidity into the real economy. And last but not least, these measures can be granted through financial institutions, but it's important that we need to keep the advantage at the level of the borrowers and not at the level of the banks. So they need to do everything to minimize the advantage at their level. So the advantage has to pass through the financial intermediaries and has to arrive to the final users. Next slide, please. So what is allowed under the temporary framework after the changes? Because the Commission has changed the rules in early April. They have understood that this is not enough for the time being. So there were two major aims to modify these rules. First of all, to help and allow investment which are related to the virus, and to give additional broader type operating cost covering state aid categories. So about the first, next slide, the 17th slide, providing investment aid for the virus-related research and development, testing and upscale infrastructure and production capacity. All this is allowed to overcome the crisis with the help of firms which are producing these kind of materials or testing vaccines, or they are working on different types of solutions. Similarities on these types of categories are that there are very high aid intensities. These are linked to investment costs. There are incentives to finish the project as soon as possible, and companies in difficulties are excluded. Next slide, please. What about the further liquidity support, which is important for the touristical sector, because these can be sectoral measures. First of all, the amended temporary framework allows the deferral of taxes by the governments, certain sectoral taxes, certain general taxes, until the end of 2022. So member states can give leeway for the undertakings. They can help their cash flow by not requiring to payment of taxes. And secondly, member states are allowed to grant wage subsidy to avoid layoffs, up to 80% of the gross wage of the person or the employee who is saved for 12 months. So member states, if they wish so, they can pay a large part of the wages of the employees which were otherwise laid off. So it's a really important possibility under the European rules. Next slide, please. And we are in the mid of the second modification of this tax, which allows to recapitalize certain non-financial undertakings. This part of the text is not adopted yet, so we know already just it's important that this should be a last resort measure to invest capital into companies which otherwise couldn't survive for a certain period of time. So the Commission would like the member states to withdraw their capital from these companies after the crisis is over, when normal market conditions return. So that's for slide 19. Next slide, please. And now the question emerges: what and how much the tourism sector can benefit from this temporary framework, from the relaxed state aid rules? What we can say that there are a wide variety of measures allowed by EU law, but it depends on the member states how to design, depending on their budgetary possibilities, depending on their political will, depending on their approach and on the impact of the crisis in their member states. And they can also aim on certain sectors, they can aim on certain activities or certain regions, but what we can say that EU law allows them to do a lot. The question is how much they will react. We can see that certain member states have notified more measures, certain a little bit less. Next slide, please. They have most probably, they are analyzing their short-term and longer-term objectives. Most probably these measures which were notified will be re-evaluated, maybe amended. There are certain already notified amendments to original schemes or additions because member states understood that this might not be enough what they originally believed. And we can say that smaller companies can benefit more because, of course, 800,000 euro is much more for a small and medium-sized undertaking than for a large group of hotel managing companies. We can see that there is possibility also to invest, but this is more for the virus related activities. So for the normal touristical sector, the general investment aid possibilities are still open. They can receive money from the existing schemes if they wish so, if situation relates to normal. Maybe if they have delayed certain investments, after seeing that the situation returns to is closer to the normal, they can make certain investment to be more up to date for the future. Next and last slide, please. So what we can say that there is a work in progress in every sense. Although also in the EU, although also at the national level, nobody knows how long do we need to apply these rules. Nobody knows how we can return to and when we can return to normal. We see that the EU uses its own funds, but it is limited since we are at the end of the programming period, the 7-year programming period of the EU multi-annual financial framework. So significant money has to come from the national budget, and their stated rules applies. Here you can see a link where the Commission updates every day what kind of measures they have approved. So you can see what in different member states have been already notified and approved, but the situation can change easily, and we don't know whether these rules will be amended in the future. But in every case, there is a reporting obligation on member states. So sooner or later, the Commission will analyze how these rules and how these funds were used and how they have been spent. So that was from my side. I would like to thank for the organization to participate in this event, and I would like to wish you health and stay safe. Goodbye.